And so what I want to do is talk about this book that I just published. It just came out in April, and the book has a lot of endorsements on it, but the one I like the most comes from Andrew Carolyi, the dean at Cornell. And he says there's as much I disagree with in this book, sometimes very strongly, as with which I agree. But this is a conversation we need to have, and we have it now. And I really like that endorsement. It's an honest endorsement. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I really want to stir a debate over where we are as business schools, what is our role in society, how do we change that? Because my argument is going to be that business schools are broken and they need to be rejuvenated for the 21st century. That's really the gist of what I'm going to say. And so I'm going to try and walk through why I say that and what I would propose to do about it. Um, if you know anything about my work, I have a stream of work on why people uh, disagree with the science of climate change. And for doing that work, I have the dubious honor of being a subject of hate mail. I actually have a folder for hate mail from people who don't like that I'm questioning why or analyzing why they disagree with the science. And someone gave me a quote when that was happening. He said, if you're not offending anyone, you never took a stand. And that was really helpful for me, that if you're going to challenge people, you're going to make them uncomfortable. And if you're not making people uncomfortable, it's a fair question of whether you're challenging them. So my goal here today is to try and make you uncomfortable, I hope, to get you to think about what are the institutions in which we practice our craft and how do we change them. And that's really going to be my focus. I want to start here, and that is the idea that business schools have woken up to climate change. Numerous business schools around the world are starting to add climate change to their curriculum, and I think this is great. I think this is really important because, to my mind, business must solve this issue. The market and business within the market is the most powerful force on earth. And while they may be causing this problem, if they're not fixing it, I don't know who will. Business makes the buildings we live and work in, the clothes we wear, the food we eat. And so if business doesn't solve this problem, I just don't think it'll be solved. But I think there's a problem here, and that is that while business schools are starting to focus on this issue, uh, we have come a long way, and this is good. I'd like to point out to you that when I was doing my dissertation on environmental issues in the early 1990s, I knocked on doors of business school professors. I went to school at MIT. I knocked on doors at MIT and at Harvard. And most of them said, "What are you doing here? This has nothing to do with the environment." And now, fast forward 30 years later, and some of those same professors that turned me down, and some of those same schools that, by the way, turned me down for a job, are now listing sustainability as one of their key areas. So we've come a long way. But again, it's not enough because I think there's a distinct problem here, and that is that most of the curriculum is really focused on the win-win. How can we make money solving this problem? And I think that is important, but it will not be enough. It will slow down the velocity at which we're running into a brick wall, but it will not reverse course. This heavy emphasis on the win-win, the argument that we just have to come up with a new widget, a new technology, we're going to get rich and we're going to solve the climate change problem, is just not going to be that simple. And we need to start to be a little more sophisticated in how we think about these issues and start to focus on the win-lose. How do we, for example, imagine a shift away from a fossil fuel economy? I just don't believe that windmills and solar cells are going to get to a point where the fossil fuel industry and all the ancillary aspects of it, whether it's the investors, the secondary industries, um, the employees, the supply chains, they're all just going to lay down and die. We have to be a little more thoughtful about how it's going to happen. Similarly, that graph on the left shows the impact on GDP at a county level in the United States. And I have to confess, this is going to be a US-centric talk, but most Western business schools are going to be the focus of what I talk about here. But you can see there are certain areas in the country and there are certain areas in the world where by the end of the century, the net impact of climate change on GDP is going to be strongly negative. How are we going to handle that? How are we going to deal with that? And just to simply say we're going to innovate our way out of the problem, it's just not going to do it. And I think that overall, we are hamstring our students by telling them they can only do things if they make money. I found this political cartoon that captures it quite nicely. Business people watching the world burn, and someone saying somehow we need to monetize this and quickly. If that's the only time we can exercise leadership, judgment, wisdom within business, I just think we're doomed. Let me give you a different example. If you are an executive at a company and you look at your payroll and you realize that women on average are paid 85 cents on the dollar. If you fall back on making the business case, then you will never do anything because that 15% differential will cost money. Should you fix it? Yes. Is the business case going to support you in that? Probably not. You should do it because it's the right thing to do. You should do it because we don't exploit people. You should do it because that's the way we want to run business. And I think we need to start to bring that into our business language, into our business courses. To my mind, the idea of making the business case to address climate change, I hate to be terribly provocative, but I want to be. It's the same as making the business case not to commit suicide. Clearly, you shouldn't commit suicide for reasons other than economics. But if we only fall back on making the business case to do anything, we are seriously impoverished for our ability to address problems. So, why do I say that we need to change how we teach business? Well, it's because we need to change and start to think about our variant of capitalism. We've been in the model or the variant of shareholder capitalism since the 1960s, 1970s. And that has been the variant in the West that we've been living under, and it is now starting to falter. And it's not just me who is saying this, and it's not just people outside the market. Whether it's Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel laureate in economics, says capitalism needs to be saved from itself. Paul Polman from Unilever, capitalism as a damaged ideology that needs to be reinvented for the 21st century. Peter Georgescu, this version of capitalism we have has been slowly committing suicide. We are at a point where capitalism, the variant of capitalism we have right now, is in question. Let me give you three reasons why I say that. Number one, in the area in the environment. And it's not just climate change. Scientists have identified 9 planetary boundaries, boundaries beyond which we should not go. And we are crossing a good number of them. Not just climate change, but also species extinction. We're in the 6th mass extinction right now. It's driving species to extinction at a very alarming rate. Biosphere integrity, that's land system loss. Nitrogen, phosphorus in the environment, fresh water availability. All these things are ways that we as humans are changing the systems of the earth. Only one of those is in correction, and that's stratospheric ozone depletion. With the Montreal Protocol, we're getting that under control. But we are, as humans, altering systems of the planet, and that's an important distinction. Also in the social realm, we are seeing economic inequality in the United States and around the world that we have not seen since the Gilded Age. And this is a serious cause for alarm, not just because some people have a heck of a lot of money, but because what comes with that money is a disproportionate influence on the political process. We saw that with Elon Musk in the last presidential election. And interestingly, a lot of research has shown that as people become more wealthy, they become less empathetic, not necessarily because they don't care, but because they become disconnected from the reality that most people live in. You could look at Jeff Bezos's extravagant wedding in Venice. You could look at during COVID. I don't know if any of you saw this, but David Geffen posted something on Instagram. It seemed like a nice message. This is where I'm quarantining. I hope everyone else is safe. And he posted a picture of his $450 million yacht parked in the Caribbean, and he got rightly attacked for this. The question that I raise on that is he did not see this coming. He did not think that there would be any objection to posting that picture. He quickly took it down, but inequality is creating some serious distortions in our society. Now, inequality and environmental problems, I really want to stress, these are not unintended consequences. These are not externalities. These are products of the system of capitalism we have right now as designed. And it's time to fix it. This is actually a place where I can quote Tucker Carlson, conservative radio host, who said, capitalism is a tool, like a staple gun or a toaster. If it's broken, fix it. And we need to fix it. Even in the area of economics, there are numerous metrics by which this period of shareholder capitalism had got out of whack. The first one, CEO compensation has grown enormously, um, over 1,460% since 1978, between 1978 and 2020, 8 times more than corporate profits. Think about that for a second. We are in an area of shareholder capitalism. The whole idea, principal agent theory, the idea that we're going to align the interests of the agents with the principals. We're going to align the interests of the executives with the shareholder, and yet the executives are doing far better than the shareholder. Something seems amiss. There's a disconnect between productivity and worker pay. You can see that graph on the bottom. Productivity kept going up, but worker compensation since around 1972, 73 has been plateaued. And so people are working harder, but they're not reaping the benefits. Total performance measured by ROI has gone down. Compound annual return on stocks has gone down. Real incomes have gone down. And federal investments in goods, public goods like education, infrastructure, and scientific research have gone down and rapidly in more recent times. And so the variant of capitalism we are working under right now is not working, and we need to start to think about fixing it. I think that the great research question for business schools should be, what kind of variant can replace it? How do we think about what is the next variant of capitalism that will replace the one we have right now? The problem for business education is that we keep teaching. This is what we're teaching students, this variant of capitalism. But even our variant of business education is faltering. Whether you go back to Warren Bennis in 2005, very famous article, How Business Schools Lost Their Way, where he really focused on the idea that we are focusing on academic research for other academics, and our research is becoming disconnected from practice. But others, more recently, this book in 2010, The Industry of Business Education is Wrestling with Basic Questions of Purpose, Positioning, and Program Design. The first author of that report is the now dean of the Harvard Business School. Another report that came out of Boston University says business schools teach innovation, but themselves rarely innovate. Rather, they remain stuck in approaches to business education that have changed very little for more than half a century. And the one at the bottom, even European business schools are going in this direction. This is a serious problem. This is the problem we're facing, in my mind. We in business schools, we sell a product. It's called the MBA. And until people stop buying it, there's very little incentive to change it. And yet, how much are we contributing to the problem by continuing to sell this product that hasn't changed? I think, and I'm seeing it in my students, that there is a problem emerging that we need to deal with. Many people look at business schools as primarily access to a network. And therefore, the educational component of business education becomes less important to them than recruiting, than social activities, and they're all important focus on getting a job. I'm not saying getting a job is not important, but the educational component of what we're providing is becoming less important to students coming to business school today. This is a serious concern that we should really try to address. So that's the business curriculum. That's the business model. And so when we talk about schools bringing in climate change or even income inequality, what they typically do is drop an elective into the curriculum that remains unchanged. We did that with ethics for decades, and now we're doing it with climate change. And this has started to lead to some really interesting critiques from people within business schools. These two articles came out. The one on the left came out in 2022. Sidney Finkelstein gave the keynote address at the AACSB Deans meeting, the accreditation meeting for all the business school deans. The title was, Are Business Schools a Scam? We produce research for academic journals. We share it with other academics. We think that informs what we do in the classroom, but what happens in the classroom remains unchanged for decades. And so are we a scam? Are we providing something that actually doesn't provide value? This one on the right came out from Luigi Zingales at the University of Chicago in 2012, but he was talking about ethics and the idea that you drop an ethics course into a curriculum that remains unchanged. And he asks, do business schools incubate criminals? That caused quite a stir. Now, that's obviously extreme, but there is a fair question of what are we producing? What are we doing in business schools? You can do that, but for example, by looking at input, throughput, and output. The input. We draw students, and this is solid academic research, students who apply to business schools typically score higher in the dark triad. They score higher in narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism than students elsewhere in school. Um, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Wall Street, an Oliver Stone movie. It's a morality tale about the excesses and greed of Wall Street. Oliver Stone wanted us to watch this movie and really question the values within business. In it, there's a character played by Michael Douglas. He plays Gordon Gekko, who's a corporate raider. That was based on Ivan Boesky, who really was a corporate raider. And there's a famous speech in it called Greed is Good. And Michael Douglas delivered it. Oliver Stone wrote that speech based on a speech by Ivan Boesky. He wanted us to hate Gordon Gekko. Unfortunately, Michael Douglas delivered it with such gravitas that interviews with both Oliver Stone and Michael Douglas say that people have come up to them and said, that speech made me want to go into business school. And they were both like, no, that's not what I intended. But people come in with this idea that's business. Cutthroat, selfish, narcissistic, psychopathic, Machiavellianism. And so we draw the students that do that. A 2-year MBA enhances those values. It enhances self-monitoring. Students care more about what other people think of them. They're comparing themselves to each other, and the importance of self-oriented values. We do this to them. We enhance this. I see this, and I'm sure you do as well, around graduation time. Students measure their self-worth by the salary they're offered when they leave the school. And this is really sad. And there's the output. The education works. This study came out in NBER in 2022, and they looked at businesses in the United States and Denmark, and they broke them into two samples. One where that were run by businesses who have a business degree, and the other where they weren't. Between the two samples, no difference in profits or sales. The big difference between the two is that employee wages went down 6% over that 5-year period. Non-business managers did not show the same labor effect. They did what they were taught to do. They made the system efficient. They did what they were taught to do. They extracted wealth from labor and handed it to the executives and to the shareholders. And the report has a very interesting conclusion. Our estimates correspond to causal effects of practices and values acquired in business school. This report on the bottom has a very interesting conclusion. Our MBA graduates marched out and destroyed the world financial system, the financial crisis of 2008. Few in academia stepped up to take responsibility for what has become a race to the bottom. I have not seen any business schools saying, geez, we produced those grads that did that. Maybe we should have a role in trying to fix it. So this is the system that we've had for decades, the throughput, the input, the throughput, and the output. But there's actually something interesting going on right now, and I'm seeing it in my students. I'm sure you're seeing it in yours. The next generation is coming in with a different sensibility. I'm not in a position to say that this is the majority, but there is a very strong and growing minority of students that really are focusing on purpose. They really want to make a difference in the world through business. This gives me hope. So you can see here, business ethics entered the top 5 most popular subjects in 2019. Students want to focus on a job with social impact after graduating. They want a career with purpose. 71% of professionals rank purpose as very or extremely important, and 66 would leave their current role for an opportunity that better reflects a sense of purpose. We have conscious quitting. We have quiet quitting. This generation of students, Gen Z and millennials, are very interesting. They're much more engaged. In the United States, they voted like they never did before. They're concerned about climate change, and they want business schools to respond, and they're getting frustrated that they're not. This article in the Financial Times had a student saying her generation want business schools to be the grown-ups and take a lead rather than simply respond to student demands. And I can tell you, I have many of my colleagues who are uncomfortable bringing up topics like climate change into the classroom because, quote unquote, they're afraid the students know more than they do. And there's a good chance they're right, but that shouldn't stop us from doing it. This is an important issue for business. We should be bringing it into the classroom. And so what do we do about this? This is my setup to what I want to focus on. 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to spend a year as a visiting fellow at, forget about the Harvard Business School part, the Institute for the Study of Business and Global Society. And that to me is the interesting area right now. I've devoted my career to focusing on sustainability, but I think that now the question is different, where I've been over the course of my career trying to fit sustainability into the existing business norms. I think it's now to start to ask questions, What are those business norms? What is the role of business in society? What is the future of capitalism? And figure out how the system, the economic system we have, can address these issues, be amended to address these issues. At the end of the day, climate change is not an environmental problem. It's a systems breakdown. And if you want to fix a systems breakdown, you have to fix the system that's causing it. That system is capitalism. So how do we think about restructuring capitalism? How do we think about restructuring business education to deal with the issues of the 21st century? Our students are asking for it. Businesses are starting to ask for it. Where are we in that supply chain to provide what they need? So I'm going to offer 9 ideas over what I would do if I had a magic wand to change the business curriculum. And we can have a conversation over whether you think I'm totally whacked out, or whether you agree, or whether I missed something, or I didn't go far enough. And hopefully I can stir a conversation. Number one, what is the future of shareholder capitalism? I think we should focus our research on this. I think we should focus more discussion in business schools on this. I love this quote from Joseph Stiglitz. He says, now that we have 4 decades of this experiment, I think we can declare it unambiguously a failure. The funny rub is everyone listening to this Zoom call right now, every one of my students and every one of my colleagues has only really known one variant of capitalism, and that's shareholder capitalism. They don't know that there was a variant that preceded it. There was a managerial capitalism. There was a variant that preceded that. We have a whole history of the evolution of capitalism. And too many people think capitalism is like a law of gravity. It's like a law of nature. It's just there. There is an idea that Adam Smith had. It emerged, it grew, it evolved, it changed, it had multiple variants around the world. What will be the next variant? What will that look like? That is a healthy conversation we should engage our students on and engage our peers on and engage society on. At a time where higher education is being attacked, I think we have an obligation and a responsibility to start to participate in the important debates in the public sphere right now. And I fear that too many of us are not doing that, thinking that the only place where we have a voice is in our academic journals. And trust me, people in business don't read our academic journals. People in business have never heard of our academic journals. So how do we engage in debates that matter in the world? Number two, how do we train stewards of the market? How do we teach our students what is the market? What is capitalism? What is this domain in which they will practice their craft? And what obligations and responsibilities do they have to maintain the security and the stability of that system? Joseph Stiglitz says right now we practice exploitive capitalism. We know the system is broken. I don't care. Not my problem. Let someone else fix it. I'm just going to grab for me right now. There's the psychopathy. That is not where we need our students to be. We need our students to have a healthy attitude towards making sure that the system works. I actually teach a course now called Reexamining Capitalism. I have them reading Adam Smith, Karl Marx, Joseph Schumpeter. They actually have never read these people. In fact, in the opening class, I asked my students, can someone define capitalism? And they struggle. They really struggle. And I find that really ironic. Coming out of a business school, and they have trouble defining capitalism. I find that really strange. I find that even more strange when you look at surveys to show that this generation of students, the millennials and the Gen Z, are becoming disenfranchised with capitalism. Yet they can't define it. That is a serious problem. So we need them to become much more educated. I understand why they're turning away from capitalism. You can see on the right, the psychological contract that they're going to do better than their parents, that they're going to have a home. The reality for millennials is not that. And so they're looking at the system and saying it didn't keep its promise. But we need to teach them, what is that system? What does it mean? We need to teach people about different capitalisms around the world. There are many ways to do this. There isn't just one type of capitalism out there. And so, for example, here in the United States, we're number one in GDP, go USA. But wait a minute, look at that Gini coefficient. We're number 114, and Gini coefficient measures inequality. That is pretty damning. Then we can look at a country like Denmark. GDP is only 38. Oh yeah, but wait, look at that. The Gini coefficient, number 8. The social progress index, number 2. GDP per capita, number 6. And you can start to learn that there's something called Nordic capitalism, very different than American capitalism, very different than Chinese capitalism. There are many different forms of capitalism around the world. And when I have my students learn this, their mind is blown that you can actually have in Denmark or Norway or Sweden a social safety net like they have and a tax rate that they have, and learn about the challenges that the system of capitalism you define represents the values that you want your society to hold. Do we have to have the kind of system we have in the United States? Do we have to have the kind of system we have in Norway or Sweden or Denmark? Do we have some kind of hybrid in the middle? Are there ways to learn about this? For example, when they learn about the tax rate in Norway and Denmark, they're blown away. And then I try to explain to them, in the United States, we used to have a tax rate that high before Ronald Reagan. And certainly even during World War II, the upper income brackets were in the 90 percentile tax rate. And so we need to teach them that there is multiple ways to do this and move away from these stale binaries. There's capitalism or socialism. And I love this quote from the Prime Minister of Denmark. It says, I know some people in the US associate the Nordic model with some sort of socialism. Therefore, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy, and really teach them how this works and look at how you can set up different kinds of systems. We need to re-examine the question of the purpose of the firm. This has really gone too far. I could walk out on the street in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I live. I'm willing to bet I could do that in your business school and my business school, and just walk up to someone with a microphone, say, finish the sentence. The purpose of the firm is to, and they will parrot back, make money for the shareholder. Is that really the purpose of the firm? Lynn Stout, sadly, has passed away, but she did some really nice work from the perspective of law. The idea that the purpose of the firm is to make money for the shareholder comes from economics, and it really works nice for their equations. But in the legal realm, shareholder value is not supported by the traditional laws of American corporate law. It's not consistent with the real economic structure of business corporations, and is not supported by the bulk of empirical evidence on what more makes corporations and economies work. And it's really fascinating when I have in my class a session on what is the purpose of the firm, and we go through this. My students look at me slack-jawed, and they're thinking one of two things. And by the discussion that goes, either I'm lying to them or everybody else is lying to them. And we need to educate students that this is not necessarily the way we should think about the purpose of the firm. I'd love to go back to Peter Drucker's definition. The purpose of the firm is to identify and serve a market. It is to create a customer. The business enterprise exists for the sake of the contribution it makes to the welfare of society as a whole. But if you train your students to go out into companies and say, your purpose is to identify and serve a market, you provide a product or service that they want to buy. And if you make money, that means you did it well. If you don't do that, if you just focus on next quarter's returns, things start to go awry. You put the cart before the horse. You start to have things like Boeing. Boeing was a company that produced high quality airplanes, had a really open culture for communication and sharing of ideas. They merged with McDonnell Douglas. They started focusing on next quarterly returns. They started outsourcing a lot of their manufacturing. The culture started to become much more controlled. And now you've got a company that doesn't produce quality airplanes anymore. That's what happens. I love the quote from Kenneth Mason, the former president of Quaker Oats. He says, making money is no more the purpose of a corporation than getting enough to eat is the purpose of life. And if you look up that quote, look up the rest of it, he has some very unkind things to say about Milton Friedman and what Milton Friedman seemed to be saying about what business people do. It's a very interesting quote. Let's start to teach students what Paul Polman says. Companies should be net positive. Profit should come not from creating the world's problems, but from solving them. How do we bring that mentality, that mindset into the business school? Our students are there. How do we bring that in? Some have tried to redefine the purpose of the firm, whether it's BlackRock or Business Roundtable or World Economic Forum. I can walk through every one of those and find some serious problems with how they've developed that. The Business Roundtable, there were some really interesting articles that came out of the Harvard Law School, just totally shredding it, saying they didn't go through board approval. This is very performative, but I don't care. This conversation's been engaged. Where are we as business schools? Where are we as business professors engaging that conversation? Why aren't we up here saying, yes, I think we should rethink the purpose of the firm. This is how we're going to teach students what it should be. I think we have a role and an obligation to do that. Number five, and this may apply more to the United States, but it does have variants around the world. The corporation is not a natural person. It's an interesting question. What rights do corporations have? And in the United States, the courts have upheld that corporations are a natural person. They have certain rights endowed to them, same as you or I as individuals in the U.S. Constitution. They have right to enter into contracts. They have right to be sued or sue. They have the right to due process or equal protection. They're protected from unreasonable search and seizure. They are guaranteed the right to trial by jury. Great. Do they have the freedom of speech? In the United States, we have the very famous Citizens United decision that says they do. Do they have freedom of religion? Again, a very famous decision in the United States Supreme Court, the Hawley Lobby decision, said they do. And both of these are really a problem if we start to think about the role of business in society. Do they have freedom of speech? Our courts say they do. Um, is spending money an exercise of their free speech? Our courts say they do. And this is where things again start to go awry when corporations can spend significant amounts of money to sway the democratic process, to distort the democratic process. Now, many of my students know they dislike the Citizens United decision, but they don't know anything about the basis behind it. And there's actually precedent for the idea that corporation is a natural person that goes back to the late 1800s. And so to understand your disagreement with Citizens United, understand your disagreement with freedom of speech for corporations, you need to know everything that goes up to it because by precedent, Citizens United makes decisions, makes sense. By practical implications, it does not. And the dissenting opinion is really fantastic and really scathing. Number six, what is the proper role of business in the government? Lobbying is a function that corporations do. Lobbying is actually a function that does help government do its job. Business has information that governments need. Yet most business schools don't have a course on lobbying. I find that really strange. In fact, even if they do have a course on lobbying, very few have a course on constructive lobbying for the public good, lobbying to make sure the market works properly. And this is a problem. How do we change that? There's the whole idea of corporate political responsibility of how companies can exercise their influence on the government system, their exercise of the fifth estate to do it in a responsible way. How do we teach that? How do we think about that? The flip side of that coin is also important. What is the proper role of government in the market? And we've fallen back on these very simplistic debates, whether Keynesian economics versus neoclassical economics, whether it's liberal or conservative, social versus capitalism, more versus less government. These binaries are not accurate. There's a whole gray zone in the middle where we need to start to think about that. And we have moved on. The whole idea of industrial policy is strong. Certainly, what Trump is doing with tariffs is a very brute version of industrial policy. But how do we think about the proper role of government in the market? Taking number six and number seven, putting them together, I started a new course called Business and Democracy, and I bring together students from the business school and the School of Government. You'd think this would be a common thing, but it's not. Again, another of the bizarre ironies of business education today. And so when I teach this course, I ask the students halfway through, what do your peers think of you taking this class? And the business students say, some of their peers say, why would you take a course on government? What does that have to do with business? Which is astonishingly naive. The students from the public policy school, their peers say to them, you actually went in that building. You actually took a course there. Business is the enemy, which is also dangerously naive. And so how do we think about the interplay? What is the proper role between the two in a properly functioning market? Mariana Mazzucato has been doing a lot of really great writing, pointing out that government has always been there. You wouldn't have the cell phone in your pocket if it wasn't for government funding for basic research to make many of those components work. There is a place for government in the market. There is a place for business policy making. How do we teach our students to think about that carefully? Number eight, are we feeding the problem? Sometimes we have to teach new things. Sometimes we just have to stop teaching what we're teaching. And Sumanta Ghoshal had a wonderful article in 2010, Bad Management Theories Are Destroying Good Management Practices. What are we teaching? They're actually leading us in the wrong direction. Well, we're teaching that technological change will solve all our problems. We are very tech focused. Is that true? Certainly not. Are there places where technological change has made things worse? Definitely. How do we think about other ways to try and solve our problems? And rather than just teaching students, all you have to do is come up with another widget. We need to rethink what business strives for. We worship at the altar of efficiency. If it's efficient, it's good. If companies make more money, it's good. If it lowers costs, it's good. Really? Always? So maybe it makes more money for the company if you move manufacturing overseas. What about the community that's left behind when you close that plant? That doesn't factor into our equations at all. And that is a sentiment that helped propel Donald Trump into office, of the MAGA voters saying, wait a minute, this isn't working for us. How do we fix this? How do we think about certain metrics and where they lead us astray? That report on the left by Joseph Stiglitz and Amartya Sen was commissioned by Nicolas Sarkozy of France, where they said, let's look at GDP and where does GDP get us wrong? And in fact, the economists who developed GDP said, do not use this as a singular metric for national economic health. What do we do now? We use a singular metric for economic health. GDP is highly distorting. It only measures the movement of money. Whether it's good or bad doesn't come into our equations. A company can make money by polluting a river, GDP goes up. Then we go clean up the river, GDP goes up. Clearly, one is good and one is bad, but both of them are leading us in the wrong direction. We can, for example, decide to extract our resources at an accelerated rate to boost our GDP, but that can hamper future generations from their ability to make money off that resource. That happened in Madagascar with overforesting. And so Joseph Stiglitz and Amartya Sen, it's a really interesting report of what is measured and how do we augment GDP to get a better metric for national economic health. On the right, Nicholas Stern stirred a healthy conversation in this report on the cost of climate change by using an extremely low discount rate. And when he was attacked, he said, look, there are places where discount rates are inherently immoral. Let's say you use a standard discount rate of 10%. Straight line depreciation, everything 10 years out and beyond, doesn't factor into equations. Everything 10 years out and beyond is worthless. Is that true? Well, that's called your future, your children's future, your grandchildren's future. Certainly that's not true. And discount rates can get us into trouble in that way. I love this quote from Amartya Sen. He says he's pointing fun at the idea of Pareto efficiency. We teach that Pareto optimality is what we're looking for. If both sides can't be made better off with a new outcome, we've reached that Pareto optimality. And he says, but wait a minute. An economy can be optimal in the Pareto sense, even when some people are rolling in luxury and others near starvation, as long as the starvers cannot be made better off without cutting into the pleasure of the rich. In short, an society or an economy can be Pareto optimal and still be perfectly disgusting. And yet we teach Pareto optimality is what we want. We need to reimagine how business provides value through the market, offering reconceptions of competition and trade. So, for example, I tried to find an extreme example in this book from the Harvard Business School Press on hardball tactics and hardball manifesto. Said that you should treat your competitors as enemies and you should want to destroy them. You should be willing to hurt your rivals, be ruthless and mean. You should enjoy watching your competitors squirm. Is that really the essence of business? How many of our business classes are infused with testosterone-driven war metaphors of conquer, destroy, eliminate? Is that really the way business should work in all situations? Paul Pullman on the right there says no. And after he stepped down from Unilever, he started something called Imagine, where he said, if you have certain industries where you have tight market concentration, what if we bring all those CEOs together and focus on pre-competitive collaboration? We're not going to talk about prices, but what can we do on palm oil? What can we do on a living wage? What can we do pre-competitive to try and improve the market and improve the systems of our business? I think it's an interesting way of thinking about how can we collaborate in business to solve collective problems, but we don't teach that. We need to reintroduce a sensible discussion on limits to economic growth, on unbridled consumption. Can we have sustainable consumption? That's a report on the left from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I actually don't know the answer to that question, but that's the Gordian knot. Can we have sustainable consumption? Can you have a sustainable economy based on consumption? This is a very important question. And then on growth, certainly you can't have unlimited economic growth in a finite system. Can we have decoupling? Can we have degrowth? Can we have steady state economics? Are there ways we can start to reconceive economic growth? We don't talk about that. All we talk about is more. And then we need to start to really encourage systems thinking, breaking down the silos within business schools and across the university. I would love to see more business students taking course in engineering, or at least going to seminars, going to public policy, going into political science, going into law, and much more diverse and well-rounded education. And that can help them start to think about moving from reducing unsustainability, which is about doing less bad, to creating sustainability, which is doing good. A totally different mindset on each. Reducing carbon emissions, the mindset to do that is very different than going carbon neutral or carbon negative. You want to make your building reduce carbon emissions? It's actually fairly straightforward. You improve the insulation, the HVAC systems, things like that. If you want your building to go carbon neutral or negative, you just have to start to ask more fundamental questions. What is a building? What does it do? How do we think about that? And so these are ways we need to stop feeding the problem. I want to close on this one, my final thought. We need to rethink the purpose of the business leader. And actually, I think we could argue that this is an issue university-wide. We have shifted from teaching students a meaningful philosophy of life to just giving them skills to make money and become well off financially. And this is a serious problem. This book on the right, Excellent Sheep, came out about 15 years ago. I was a professor at Yale. And his metaphor is simple. Our students are excellent. They're very smart, but they're sheep. They're looking for external affirmation. They're losing that internal life. They're losing that internal motivation. And they're looking for external metrics on where they should go. And that is really dangerous. I sit on a scholarship for high school kids, and I'm seeing kids developing resumes from like the fifth grade, which is a really awful thing to teach students. Your life can be summed up on a piece of paper to be evaluated by somebody else. How do we do that? And so my answer to doing that is start to think about wisdom. How do we think of character? But yet we don't do that in higher education. We don't do that in research. What do we do as scholars? We take data, we look at relations, create information. We take that information, we look at patterns, and we create knowledge, and we stop there. We don't apply principles, educate principles in order to create wisdom, character, judgment, which is where I think we should be going as educators. It's interesting because I have some colleagues saying, Andy, I'm not ready to talk about values in the classroom. And my answer is, you already are. Everything I talked about so far has a set of values embedded within it. And efficiency is always good. Purpose the corporation is to make money for the shareholder. Nature only has value for us to consume. People are inherently selfish. We teach a Hobbesian world in business schools. Is that really the messages we want to get across? We should stop teaching the values we teach and start teaching new values. And so I actually got funding from the Arthur Van Davis Foundation to start a course called Management as a Calling. And this is not only a new kind of course, for me at least, but it's a new way of teaching. You know, David Brooks says the way we learn character is not the way we learn, skills in a classroom. It's more practiced and learned like a craft. We have to learn it by doing it. We have to learn it by self-examination. And so what I do here is I take students on a retreat into the woods. I take away their cell phones and their computers, and I guide them through exercises to discern the calling for themselves. That puts me in a very different place. I'm not the knowledge expert standing in front of the room. I'm more like a systems architect creating the environment in which they feel authentic, open, vulnerable, willing to examine their deeper questions about the meaning in life. And that is something that they have to do themselves. And I also think there's an opportunity for more teaching like this as AI starts to intrude on our education process. There's a lot of things we teach that AI can replace. This they cannot, AI cannot. AI cannot teach this kind of relational learning where they learn in the environment from each other, looking deep in themselves. This is something that they have to do in a more human way. It's more relational and transactional. And I think that's really important. Now, what stands in the way of everything I've described? There's my blueprint for how I would change business education. What stands in the way? Well, number one is the rankings. The rankings stifle innovation. They homogenize who we are as business schools. There should be different kinds of business schools out there, but with rankings, those that care about them, they're just chasing the same model. And we need to have more diversity in business schools. There should be business schools. If you want to be this kind of business leader, go there. If you want to be this kind of business leader, go there. I saw a speech by David Brooks, and he said, it's interesting. There are some schools, he's talking about the undergraduate level, where you meet a grad from there, you know they went to that school. What is it about that school that does that? And he says it's about character formation and about a cohesive moral culture. That what they want their graduates to be is embedded within their courses, their co-curricular activities, the names on the buildings, the donors that give money, the recruiters that come in. It's all consistent. Rankings get in the way of that. How do we change that? The rewards and incentives. I am rewarded for research. Capital R, research. Small t, teaching. Infinitesimal S, service. How do we start to think about elevating teaching in the reward system to get us focused more on being excellent teachers in the classroom and, more importantly, changing the system in which the younger scholars come up and learn their craft. We need to change the promotion and tenure process. And then the third is it's an institutional challenge. Um, One school can totally change what they do unless you're guaranteed tenure. It's a pretty risky proposition to follow it unless you're guaranteed tenure. Because if you don't get tenure, you're going to have a saleable product on the market. You have to have a packet. So how do we change business schools, training, the journals? And there are efforts to do this. Our RBM is one that's really exciting for trying to drive change. So there's my argument for where I think business schools are, what we need to change. Students are demanding it. How do we rethink the curriculum? And I'd like to just bring us back to this thought here. This is a book by Rakesh Khurana. It came out in 2010, and we looked at the history of the business school. And the book is called From Higher Aims to Hired Hands. And he points out that business schools were originally founded to train a professional class of managers in the mold of doctors and lawyers to seek the higher aims of commerce in service to society. When business schools were first proposed, universities said this isn't a serious area of academic inquiry, and they said, no, this is what we're going to do. But his conclusion is we've effectively retreated from that goal, leaving a gaping moral hole at the center of business education and therefore management itself. The time has come to rejuvenate the intellectual and moral training of future business leaders. He wrote that in 2010. We have not fixed it since, and it's time to do that. I thank you for attention. I hope I've stirred your thinking. I hope we can have a very engaged and interesting conversation. That is the book. If you do buy it at the Stanford University Press, use the code Hoffman20, Hoffman, Hoffman 20, and you get 20% off. There's my plug for you. And with that, let's open it up to conversation.
So if you have any questions, please do ask. But just so we can see you, could you click on your virtual hand? Visa.
Hi, Professor Hoffman. Thank you so much for that very interesting talk. And I have read your Flourishing as part of my coursework in PhD, and it was very interesting. And I hope to read this as well. And so just to give you a brief background, I did my MBA, and after that I worked in strategy consulting. And post that, I did a PhD in strategy. Now,
Yep.
what would your answer be? And now I'm currently in the job market. But and interestingly, my thesis was centered around your work in sustainability. But
Yep.
how would you kind of, address questions in the job market, which says, strategy is about creating and sustaining competitive advantage for firms. And whatever you are kind of, I think all your arguments are perfectly making sense, but it's kind of striking at the root of, the strategy as a discipline, right? I mean, in terms of, it's fundamentally changing the question of competitive advantage at what cost.
Right.
So
Right.
what would your advice be to, emerging scholars like me or emerging researchers like me to address that in when we are in the job market and when.
Well, first of all, you're on the job market and the rules are what they are. So I think you need to, play what Deb Myerson calls the tempered radical. You do want to get a job, you do want to get tenure, and the rules right now are what they are. But keep in the back of your head and try and cultivate those values that are at variance with the dominant rules. Competitive advantage does not mean be ruthless and mean, does not mean screw people. I'm not going to try and get political here, but we do have a mentality that I think a lot of people think that business is win at all costs. If you have a contract, you don't like it anymore, just break it. And that's a very dangerous future. And if we create these amoral people that only want to make money, we're only going to make the problem worse, and we're going to contribute to it. And so I'm trying to just instill in people an idea that what we do does have consequences. We are feeding the problem, and we need to step up to that role and do it responsibly. But your position right now as a newly coming on the market is very different than mine. I'm a tenured chaired full professor. And so I've been arguing that, for your stage, be tempered, but don't let that other side of you die and keep it cultivated and grow it. And then when you get tenure and when you advance, start to think about what you're going to do. I'm a full professor. I can define the role any way I want. And I don't mean go out and play golf. I mean, I am starting to challenge the institutions that raised me. And I don't think enough of us do this. One of my colleagues said the problem with our field is we've got too many senior professors thinking like junior professors. They keep chasing more citation counts. I have enough citation counts. I don't need any more. If I do a paper with a junior professor or a doctoral student, why would I ever assert primary authorship? The value to me is that. The value to you is that. Why would I do that? And yet I know people who do this. They're so desperate for more citations. What's wrong? And so at this stage of my career, I want to call out the way the institutions have to change so that your generation can come up in an environment that will allow you to be the kind of academic you want to be, and hopefully when you become a full professor, you will define the role the way you want it to be. My analogy for the trajectory of a professor is you want to be a jazz musician. That's your goal. Right now, you have to learn your scales. Too bad. You got to learn your scales. You got to learn to practice your craft. Then over time, you'll play somebody else's music. And then at some point, you're going to play your own. You're going to define it in your way. You're going to be the kind of professor you want to be. That's when this gets fun. That's when this gets really fun. Keep that in your vision.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much.
Samar?
Thank you so much, Ebrat. Thank you so much, Andy.
Pleasure.
That's eye-opening. Um, Business schools are not operating in isolation, and obviously within the university setup, within the ranking systems which we are chasing, the whether it's the journal ranking setups or the ref ratings, that also imposes um, certain conditions, and alongside um, business schools and the universities are operating as the capitalistic business models itself.
Yep.
In that business model, students are the customers, and customer is always right, and staff members are the employees who are treated as employees.
Mhm.
And that pinches me a lot how to come out of that cycle. It's no more the game of learning and teaching, it's more of that business model. And I'm a senior lecturer, still consider myself as early career. It's been 8 years I've completed my PhD, and feeling that struggle in my head how to raise myself of this position where I would be delivering the knowledge and learning, and
Mhm.
not just a commodity business, the degree paper to the students. Uh, so I don't know if you can have some,
No,
understanding on this.
I loathe the model that students are customers. Um, they are not walking into a car dealer and buying a product. They have decided to enter an environment that we create in which they're educated. And I'll tell you something. I'm seeing more and more business students starting to get really angry saying, where's the rigor? There's no rigor here. This is a country club. I'm seeing it at my school at Ross. I'm seeing it at Berkeley. If you look up Poets and Quants, they had a three-part article series on students at Stanford saying, there's no education here. This is a joke. And so I think students are starting to push for change. And I think that we need to step up and say, what are we? I am not just selling a product. I think, again, my argument to my peers to be elders, part of that is saying, go back to why you got into this in the first place. Why did you become a professor? Was it really just to make money for the university by pandering to students? That's not why I got into it. I really wanted to have an influence on the next generation of business leaders to make the world a better place. At the end of the day, that is our biggest impact. I know that many of us think that our biggest impact is our journal articles. They are not. Our biggest impact is the students that we influence and how they think and how they bring that out into the real world. I'd like us to get back to that. Maybe that's a little idealistic. Maybe I have to face up to the fact that there's some hardcore economics here. But I also know that going back to that model from higher aims to higher hands, I mean, a lot of schools, you go to other parts of the university and ask someone in chemistry or physics, what do they think of the research coming out of business school? You'll get a laugh. It's like, that's not research. I went to MIT, and when Sloan was proposed, the engineering professors did not want it, but the business school model was growing. I was a joint degree engineering and business, and one of my advisors, a very senior engineering professor, he still calls Sloan what the early engineering professors called it. They called it the secretarial school. They hold it in low regard. Um, and I think that we need to change that. We're a professional school. We should be more concerned with the profession. We shouldn't be so fixated on our academic journals. Particularly, you brought up impact ranking. I just think that really perverts what we do, especially in a world where there's a growing palette of platforms that we derisively call A and B and C journals. No, they're journals that reach different kinds of audiences. And if we think that we're only going to do this A journal, which is only theoretical work aimed at other academics, driven by what Don Hambrick calls a theory fetish, may be interesting about the world out there, but it doesn't contribute to theory, reject. We're going to become increasingly irrelevant. And there will come a point, and it's happening right now, where people in the United States are supporting politicians saying, who are these people in the university? They sit in this ivory tower. They make a lot of money. They sip lattes all day. Who are they? Let's tear them down. And that's dangerous because our society really needs us, and we've done a terrible job of communicating it. Some of us are so arrogant, we don't want it. I've advocated that we need to bring our work out into the public, and I had a colleague just rip into me saying, look, I can't teach my research to the public in the same way I can't teach physics to a gerbil. Uh, Thank you very much for making my point for me. That kind of arrogance is why we are feeling the brunt we're feeling right now. I hope that helps.
So if I ask how, if will you be able to give me three operational points? What shall I do to make that change to the capitalist structure of the business school?
And what is your position in that business school?
So let's assume I'm the most powerful person.
I'm sorry, what?
Most powerful person.
You're a dean.
Let's assume, yeah. I'm only a lecturer, but let's
You're a
assume.
lecturer, the least powerful.
Yes.
I mean, it's hard. You change what's in your zone of influence. I'm a professor. A full professor. So my writing, my teaching, and my public advocacy, my role on executive committee. I've been able to get the Ross School to add a fourth criteria to our annual review called practice. How are we impacting the world out there? We can now, for example, when you come up for tenure, get a letter from a person in business. When I came up for tenure and said, "Can I get a business person to write a letter?" People laughed at me, said that has no bearing on our decision. And now that's changed. So I'm changing things within my sphere of influence. There's no silver bullet here. I can't give you a simple answer, do X, Y, and Z, and the world's going to fundamentally change. But I do think what I'm doing is trying to speak out on this to show perhaps professors there's another way to model your career. There are other ways to model business education. And I think of it like we're in the beginning of an S curve. I do think that a lot of people see the value in what I'm arguing here. They have questions about how it's going to get done. And as more and more people start to push for change, then that creates leverage and will move up the S curve. And so, what is your sphere of influence? How are you going to try and affect that? That's the question that you're going to have to ask yourself. I have no simple answers here. This is not a simple problem. This is a massive institutional challenge. I'm very involved in the Responsible Research and Business Management Network. So is EBRAT. That is changing the journals. That's changing to produce more academic research that has relevance in the public. Let's face it, a lot of our academic research, it has no bearing on the real world. It contributes to theory, but what are we contributing to how the markets operate and things like that? So that's a long roundabout answer. I hope it doesn't sound like a dodge, but I think we're facing a very challenging issue right here, and a very complex one and a very large one. And we each have to figure out what is our role, what is our leverage point to try and drive change.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Samar. Jim?
Hi, Andy. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
good to see your face.
Thank you. I'm in my pajamas still. Three things after I say, wow, everything you said, I agree with. You said it much better than I can. And it superbly fits with number one point that I want to make. There's an organization called Be the Tipping Point that's composed of the International Association of Jesuit Business Schools, Global Responsibility Leadership Initiative, ICOS, and a small group called Global Movement Initiative that is committed to transforming business practice by transforming business education. And one of the beauties of what it's doing and trying to do is to recognize that every faculty member today can start aligning his or her course with the need for a sustainable world.
Yeah.
I will send you a request to spend 12 minutes talking with me about a picture I will paint. The picture is that on January 1st, the Ross School, I've already done it with one person at MIT, the Ross School will announce that during this term, 75% of its courses were aligned with the need for a sustainable world. And that next term, 98% will be. My question to you will be, what would that look like in the world? You can't, the only way you can't answer it, I'll send this to you, is that you can't do this. That's not allowed. It has to be like, how would that impact other schools? Or how did this come about? Or what will this mean for global education? I'll see how you say it. 12-minute request there.
Okay. But listening to what you're saying, Jim, I think that when we think about redesigning business education, part of it is also getting out of the structure we have right now. So a business degree is 2 years, breaking up into 8 quarters, breaking up into 4 courses per quarter. There you go, 32 courses. What do we do in those 32 courses? And I just think that's a very static, old model. Ask any student, not just in business but elsewhere, where is the best learning? It's often in the interstitial space between classes. It's in seminars. My advice to students, business students, is business schools are broken, number one. Two, go anyway. The power you have in business is enormous. But number three, take control of your education. Be a discerning consumer. Go to seminars up in engineering. Go to public policy. Organize a conference. Organize a panel. Do an independent study. Knock on a professor's door. I'm amazed how few students do that. And the number one metric for someone's satisfaction with their college education is a personal relationship with a professor. And yet many students just come through and they just want, my provocation to my colleagues, and I'll ask you what do it in your own head. If we lined up all the MBA students and said, here's 2 doors, go through that door. You're going to pay your tuition, you're going to get 2 years education, then you're going to get your degree. Go through this door, you're going to pay your tuition, we'll give you the degree right now, you're on your way. How many will go through that second door? I fear a lot. And that's a pretty sad statement about what we're doing. And so I think we should really go down to the brass tacks and rebuild the programs from scratch, not
No,
not integrate the sustainable development goals into the courses they exist.
oh, no. I'm not talking about integrating the sustainability goals into the existing curriculum. I'm talking about changing every single course
Yep.
to start with a different purpose
Yep.
and having that be available. I completely agree about curriculum change, and all of that has to change. But the beauty of what you and I can do today is we could stop doing what we've been doing.
Right.
And that's available to absolutely everybody.
Yep.
And
Yep.
what last thing, second one is, which is the third one, sort of, we're writing a fourth application to the MacArthur Foundation. There's 3 others that preceded it in many ways to transform business education, not because we're sure there'll be a competition in 2027 for $100 million, but to start the process of getting people to take a piece of the application and do it.
Mhm.
The thing is to get MacArthur and others to recognize that we're out of time, that we're facing the extinction of our species, maybe in 20 years and maybe 10 years, if we keep doing what we're doing. So I completely agree with everything. But the beauty of the situation is that every faculty member can start the change right now, not by embedding sustainability into the course, by grounding every course in need for a sustainable world. And thank you for letting me talk so long. I completely agree with everything you said.
Thank you, Jim. Gulame, if I see it correctly.
Yes, hi, it's Guillaume. Uh, so, hi everyone. I'm at Université Laval in Quebec City, in the province of Quebec. And it's been a long time, but we've met
We have.
during my time with Paul Srivastava at Concordia.
Yep.
First, I would like to say thank you. Like my predecessor or the previous speaker, I agree with everything you said, and I think what you're saying is very important. Second, I liked that you're attacking economics, or perhaps a certain perspective of economics, which is a rather brutal form of capitalism. That's become predominant perhaps today, and but some authors, even in management, say economics thinking has won the war on hegemony in business schools, and I recognize that many students attend business schools without prior economic knowledge. It used to be a requirement, though, and so one question I have is, well, it's not really a question. It's a finding that, okay, since they don't, and it seems to be a fact, we only have to, we as professors and perhaps program designers, we have to adjust and teach economics, and for that matter, perhaps philosophy and ethics. But economics, the basics in economics used to be a pre-requirement to enter a business school.
Yeah. I mean, neoclassical economics, the variant pushed by the Chicago School, dominates. Joseph Stiglitz was a student of Milton Friedman, and he is quite frank, saying that I tried to have conversations with Friedman, saying that in theory, this may work, but in practice, markets without government control will not serve the public. And Friedman couldn't accept that. He couldn't see that. And so, in that tradition, but you're right that economics has dominated our approach to business. A nice book to capture the hazards of that is Essence of Decision by Graham
Yeah.
Allison. And he points out that I won't go into the whole thing, but take a look at it, folks. And it just lays out the political model, the bureaucratic model, and the rational actor model to say all three are useful for understanding the world around us. And if you only focus on one, you can get into some pretty bad situations. But economics has dominated because we love numbers. Numbers must be right. Yet, when well, I won't, but the book does have a healthy conversation over the value of economics. Another part of it is the effect of the Nobel Prize, which many people don't know. There is actually no such thing as a Nobel Prize in economics. It wasn't one of the original prizes. It was brought about later by the National Bank of Sweden. Even the Nobel family is sued to try and have them stop calling it the Nobel Prize in economics because it's not. Um, and in fact, if you look at the speech by Hayek, who won the first Nobel Prize in economics, what did his speech say? I think this is a really bad idea. You shouldn't confer this kind of legitimacy on an economist. And that's what we do. Take a look at it. And so it is rife with elevating a field that has value, but that value has become distorted and overpowering. And in fact, I think some of what I'm arguing is let's bring the humanities and social sciences more deeply into business education. Let's bring philosophy into business education. I'd love to do that.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I'm going to drop something into the chat for everyone if you're curious. I told you I have this course, Management as a Calling, and I've been funded by the Arthur Finding Davis Foundations to develop a program to teach business professors how to teach it. And there is funding to come. So I can just drop that into the chat if you want to take a look at it. But I just want to put that out there before too many people leave.
Thank you, Andy. Emmanuel?
Right. Thank you very much. Professor, I'm grateful for this presentation because I think it's touching on a very important topic that not too many are willing to touch on. Now, what my question is, I believe my question is essentially an extension sort of the presentation that you've done, and the type of capitalism that you referenced in the presentation is the type that has influenced a lot of global monetary systems that, like the IMFs and the World Banks, World Trade Organization that supervise international trade and all of that. And largely this has been used by the large corporations to exploit developing countries. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on rethinking capitalism and how this might translate into ensuring fairer business practices that facilitate the development of highly resourced, low-income countries instead of exploiting them. And when I was also thinking about this question, I realized that none of the SDGs actually look at how we can, well, not directly, as far as I know, how can we ensure that countries can be engaged in a fairer business interaction where they are not exploited and can actually be allowed to develop, but currently are not. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like something you're much more knowledgeable than I am on, but I think that again, this one way that we're teaching business, what does teaching someone how to run a multinational corporation have to do offer? How much overlap is there when someone wants to develop a small business in Tanzania? I'm just pulling that out of the top of my head. That the context matters and that we need to teach different models for how to organize and run businesses. We only, in my school, it's the shareholder model. You want to build a company, you go to try and attract investors, whether it's private equity or stockholders, and you build a pyramid, and off you go. What about a low profit LLC? What about a hybrid organization? What about a B Corp? What about a co-op? What about an ESOP? There are many ways to do this, yet we teach one. And I think we're doing a terrible disservice. So you're bringing up a very important point. Are there other ways to develop an economy? What does an economy look like from an indigenous perspective? What does it look like from a developing country perspective? How do we teach that? How do we bring that into the education, allowing people where they want to go? If I want to work for Bank of America. Maybe I don't need to know that, although certainly my lending practices could have an influence on what you're describing here. Um, how do we educate students more broadly into thinking about the market, capitalism, and the role of business in all its complexity? And I think you're just highlighting one more facet of that, where people just take these things for granted.
Gerard?
Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
thanks, Brad, and thank you, Andy. That was a great presentation. My question, I put a comment in the chat that the most popular event at the Academy this year was on space-based businesses. So kind of says something about us. But my question is a little referred to what Jim talked about in terms of the existential crisis. He thinks it's going to happen a little earlier than I do, but the notion of an existential crisis still exists.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, do we have time to make the kinds of changes that you're talking about?
What choice do we have? I mean, social change is not linear. It goes through big steps, big jumps when properly motivated. We have a role. I mean, events do this. Role events are not objective occurrences. They need to be framed. Um, I think that we in higher education have an obligation to step out into the public sphere and start to argue a point of view, whether it's positions on tariffs or a position on climate change. Um, the speech at the UN yesterday was highly disturbing, and those of us who are engaged in this work shouldn't be afraid to speak up on this. So, you know, I think related to your question, people often ask me, am I optimistic? And my answer is no, but I'm hopeful. Hope and optimism are two different things. Optimism is looking at the odds, saying you're in favor and doing it. Hope is saying, I don't care what the odds are, I have to do it. And hope, in many ways, has accomplished far more than optimism has. It has achieved what many people thought was impossible. So, do we have time? I don't know. Does that mean
Yeah,
we
and I think, sorry, I'm going to take another little shot at this, I guess, because in a sense, we are, as you pointed out, we are teaching our students to perpetuate a crisis that is guarantees a dystopian future for them.
Yeah.
So, what is our moral responsibility at this point in time?
Yeah.
And what should we mobilizing? What should we be mobilizing them to do? I think is the question. If the since we know that is the case.
Yep. Yeah, and I think I kind of think you're making the point of my book. I mean, in my presentation, that we've become too complacent, that we are comfortable in our jobs. We live very comfortable lives as academics. And where is the moral responsibility we have? But I hesitate to put it on moral grounds because that's my morality. It may not be yours. But if we just look at the output and the product of that output, I wrote an article on this for the conversation on the need to bring character formation more deeply into business education. There's a comment that came back that I just thought was very interesting. Someone wrote back and said, look, I've been in business for 30 years. And in my opinion, A, I think we're producing too many MBAs. And B, they're coming into my company and they don't know what they're supposed to do. So all they do is look for efficiencies. All they do is look for ways to squeeze the system to make more money for the senior executives and the shareholders. And that's destructive in many ways, the company, because in many ways they're cutting into bone. If you've read the article that got turned into a book, Bullshit Jobs, I mean, the argument he's making is that our best and brightest often go into jobs that produce no value to society, but they're paid handsomely. They could be an accountant. What's their job? They're some rich person skim on their taxes and make even more money. They can go work for McKinsey and help Purdue Pharma sell more opioids that kill people. Our students are doing this. We need to change it. I mean, one thing that does help is if you've ever seen the speech by David Foster Wallace at Kenyon College, This is Water. And his major point is, if you don't understand what you're swimming in, you will just conform. Our students don't understand what they're swimming in. They are channeled towards finance and consulting. They don't know that, but they are. And will they be happy there? We don't care because their salary is going to be really high and will juice our rankings. That's what we care about. And I think that's immoral. I think that we should, that's my morality. You could say it's business school is a great tool for upward mobility. I'm not going to argue with that. I'm not going to say money is bad. I'm not going to say that you shouldn't seek a comfortable life for your loved ones and your children. But are you going to have a meaningful life? Are you going to be satisfied? One of the books I assign my students is Man's Search for Meaning. The whole idea that finding a meaningful life is the route to happiness. It is not expensive cars and expensive houses. That really, at the end of the day, is not going to do it for you. And I think the variant for academics is constantly seeking more citations, a higher H index. And when you come to the end of your days, everyone in this room, when you come to the end of your days and you look back and say, did I live a life of meaning? Was I producing as an academic the kind of world that I want? You're not going to think of your citation counts and your H index. You're going to think about the students that came through your classroom that you touched to become the kinds of models you want to be in the world out there. That's what it's all about.
And that makes for a great closing speech where we still have 4 hands raised.
Oh boy. Can we just go through the 4 questions really quickly and I'll see if I can handle them?
Okay, Ralph, you are going next, followed by Sajina, Laura, and Andrea.
Thanks, Ibrat, and thanks, Andy. That was really fantastic. I don't often leave a session like this thinking that I should buy a book, but I'd be really keen to order your book.
Are you in a car, a train, or a bus?
I'm in a car.
Okay.
It's a public holiday here today. It's Heritage Day in South Africa.
Okay.
So I was surfing, and that's why I'm looking a bit disheveled. So, 2 quick questions, perhaps observations. I mean, I wonder whether there is perhaps a bit more heterogeneity in business schools as you make out. And perhaps, I mean, maybe this is also a geographic thing. Maybe in the US it is as kind of dire as you describe. I actually don't know. I mean, I don't know as much about that scene as perhaps I should. Yeah. But quite a few times. I mean, I agreed with a lot. Most things you said, but quite a few times I thought, like, hang on, that's not really the case in our school. Like, I don't think anybody is embarrassed about talking about values or climate change in any of our classes and in our faculty. So I think there might be actually some virtue in thinking about that heterogeneity and supporting it in some way, perhaps celebrating it, and also giving young scholars a bit of a sense of that heterogeneity, so that they can also realize there are career paths where they don't need to feel like they need to publish 5 AMJs every year and you play by those rules that you describe, and then become very much oriented along those rules that you describe. So that's the first point. The second point, I was really struck by your thing about knowledge is becoming less and less something that we are going to have to kind of aspire to transmitting in this age of AI and so on. And really the next point is moving to this wisdom sense. But that puts quite a bit of onus on us as well. And I mean, what are we doing to, we can't pretend to foster wisdom among students, if we ourselves haven't done that work. And what does that work look like? And are we doing that in PhD programs or elsewhere where we're trying to support that kind of step in our young colleagues?
Okay, I've written down thoughts on your questions, but I want to just run through the 4 really quickly and then I'll try and respond to all of them. Sajina?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brett, for arranging this, and Andy, for all the insights you've shared today. I wanted to revert back, Andy, to the earlier conversation about sphere of influence and affecting positive change. I loved how you mentioned the need to and the value in impacting students' lives, and that being a measure of real value creation from business schools. Also reconceptualizing key definitions of things like an economy. What does it mean from an indigenous perspective? What does it mean from a developing perspective? So my question is, what kind of roles could people who have authority outside of academia and yet also an understanding of and presence in academia play in affecting such changes? So the likes of professors of practice and clinical professors, what kind of roles could they play in achieving such goals? And are they in a good position or a disadvantaged positions within the institutional boundaries of academia to make such change happen?
Okay. Laura.
Yeah, thank you also so much from my side. I maybe pose exactly the opposite question to Sajina, not the outside in perspective, but maybe the inside out. So you said at the beginning, if you haven't offended anyone, you've probably never taken a stand. So I think I've offended a lot of people in my academic life, because I was always an engaged academic, and also in many institutional roles. And at the moment, I'm also on the executive board of a university which calls itself the University of Sustainability in Germany, and which is very active in taking a stand on certain topics. And we realized that, and I mean, the same is true in many countries, especially in the US, that there is also a lot of conservative backlash against sustainability. And yeah, and I think it's a really difficult path at the moment, right? To, on the one hand, to take a stand, and many of the things that you said, I fully agree with that. But it's getting harder and harder. And then at the same time, the question is, if we as business schools and as higher education institutions move a lot into this value-driven, position, of course, we also invite an even stronger backlash. And my question is, what do you think are also maybe the ways in which we can organize ourselves better, right? So I, for example, posted a link into the chat, a Copenhagen declaration that we just drafted with some people from CBS, to take a stand on European sustainability regulation and the rollback we see. And I think we need more collective action as well, just beyond, this individual, reconsidering how we teach and how we engage with our students. And I was interested in, which institutional levers you see for us to be stronger together.
Okay, thank you. Andrea.
I also thank you for this. I'm excited to read the book. I'm a junior scholar, so I'm an assistant professor, and it is not the first time I've been told as a junior scholar to kind of do what I need to do to get to a point where I have more power. And I haven't read the book Excellent Sheep, but I have read the essay that
You've
was
read it then. It's one of those books that started as an article and became a book. If those of you want to find the article, it's called "Don't Send Kids the Ivy League; It'll Turn them into Zombies." It's a funny article, but it's the same point. Just like bullshit jobs. Read the article. You'll get the gist of the book.
So I guess kind of building on that idea of Excellent Sheep, and I actually have assigned that in a class before, because I was trying to get at this like reflection. But I personally feel like I struggle with that, like feeling like I'm being an excellent sheep by just kind of going through and checking the boxes that I'm supposed to check. So do you have any suggestions for junior scholars who are trying to be systems change agents in a way, while we're also navigating the constraints of, if we don't do what we have to do, then we don't have this platform in the long run.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I think that was all of them. Okay. So really quickly, the first question around diversity. I think this is a really interesting challenge. I've given this talk a few times, and one thing I often hear is, I know that's a problem everywhere else, but it's not a problem at my school. I've heard that many times, and I just laugh. I mean, okay, you've got it cracked. Good for you. I don't believe it. I actually gave this talk one time at a Jesuit school, and the dean, the priest that invited me loved it. The students loved it. The dean was furious, and he demanded an apology. And he actually said, "This may be a problem at a godless university like yours, but it's not a problem here." And I had to humbly and politely say, "I'm sorry, but I don't believe that. I think if you're teaching business in today's world, you're teaching shareholder primacy. You're teaching the kinds of models because your faculty were trained at the same place all these others were." So I would love to see more diversity. I would love to see the Jesuit schools, the religious schools step out and say, "We're going to teach a different kind of business." There was an interesting book that came out a couple of years ago called Cathonomics. And it was an argument. What would economics look like if it was animated by Catholic social teaching? It's a really interesting book saying it'd be in a different system. Or how many of you have read Small is Beautiful? My favorite chapter in that book by E.F. Schumacher is called Buddhist Economics. Now, clearly there's no such thing, but he said, what would economics look like if it was animated by Buddhist principles? It would look totally different. And so why can't business schools be that way? I think that's an interesting thing. The question of wisdom, values, bring into the classroom, that's what we used to do. That's what universities used to do. We don't teach you your values, but we put you in a context to explore and develop them. There's a wonderful book by Anthony Kronman. He used to be the dean of the Yale Law School, called Education's End. Why have colleges and universities given up on teaching about the meaning of life? It's a really interesting read of saying, maybe we need to get some of that back. And maybe that actually would provide value to society. I think it would. What is the role for those outside academia, clinical professors, professors of practice? We all have our place. And I know that we have a hierarchy in the university. It drives me nuts that, you know, top researchers, they're the top of the game, and everyone at pecking order down below. We will exploit lecturers so that we don't have to teach as much. We demote the value of teaching. We call it a teaching load. It's a burden, something like the shed. That's a problem. And so, but clinical professors can bring the real world into the classroom, professors of practice as well. And so I do think there's an arrogance built into the system. If you haven't never heard of it, there's a phenomenon called the Carl Sagan effect, that if you engage in public discourse, you must not be a serious academic. Because Carl Sagan was denied tenure at Harvard because he was the most popular astrophysicist in the world. That arrogance is still there. We need to kill it and recognize the value of bringing the real world into schools. Our students love it, and there's a value for it. And there's others outside the academy as well that have a role to play in this. Alumni. They went to the business school. They may be donors. They have the voice of the dean. Maybe they're on an executive committee. Their students may be going there. What's your role in trying to push this? In my opinion, the best way to change a university is have a donor dangle money. And suddenly your president will start doing cartwheels for whatever they're pushing about. The question about we are in highly political times, and so standing out and taking a position could be hazardous. So I don't take that lightly. There was an interesting essay that was written by the president of Wesleyan University. It was about 3 or 4 months ago, saying that universities need to stand up to Trump. And he got rightly attacked, saying, oh, that's easy for you to say. You're a small liberal arts college. You don't rely on government funding or grants, and you're in a safely blue state. But what if you're a university that's in a red state, or you're a professor in a red state? So I'm not going to be glib about it. Similarly with companies, we can get mad at companies for starting to go under the radar on things like sustainability, but they have to be pragmatic. And so I don't think you should take that away. By the same token, there are organizations out there are professions out there that are stepping forward. The American Medical Association has been very vocal against what Robert F. Kennedy is doing in the Department of Health, saying that we need to actually hold up science to decide how we handle things. The American Bar Association actually produced a press release saying we believe in the institutions of law. I mean, you may laugh that they did that, but they had to do that. Where is the Academy of Management? Where is any kind of academic body of business school professors saying this is what, or in conjunction with business practitioners saying we in business actually think that this is a good idea or a bad idea, but we don't do that. And I just think that there is at least room for a discussion over whether we should. And I would add, by the way, there's safety in numbers. You can come out as the singular professor, going after the powers that be, it's easy for you to get your head cut off. But if there's a group of you, there's safety. And then the question of, you do have to do what you need to do. I don't want to be overly idealistic about this. You are, coming into a system as professors, you are growing as scholars. You need to, prove that you can do the craft of being an academic. You need to play the tempered radical. I really like Deb Meyerson's ideas on this. She looked at, blacks in all white organizations, women in an organization that had a glass ceiling, gays in homophobic organizations. And they can leave, the organization will never change, they can stay and conform, or they play this middle role of tempered radical. For you as academics, if you want to have impact in the real world, think about publishing in places like The Conversation, or there's so many outlets out there for you to get your work out into the real world. But be careful and understand that the rules of the game right now to get tenure are academic journals. I wish it wasn't so, but it is. Recognize that. Don't expect to put your passion on the back burner until you get tenure or get full. You're talking 7, 14 years. Your ability to relight that fire, it may not be there. And so I really don't put it on the back burner, but recognize the realities of the world you're in and try and play this dual role. If you're doing research that does have bearing on real world issues, that is not as daunting as it sounds. I mean, my early work was on environmental issues. It was very topically relevant. I actually had a joke. I can publish my work twice because I can write the academic paper and then I can translate it into a form that people can read. And I would add that that is an important skill to have. To be able to talk to the general public, you have to be multilingual. I know many professors who cannot talk without using jargon. A, no one will understand you. B, I actually think that raises questions whether you really understand your work. If you can't explain it to your mother or your father or your 15-year-old brother or sister, I really question whether you understand it at all. And so this is a very valuable skill to have. I pride myself on the ability that I can give an academic seminar, and then I can also put on jeans and a flannel shirt and give a talk to the Sierra Club. Then I can put on my pinstripe suit and give a talk to the National Association of Manufacturers. All three could be the same talk, but I framed it in different ways for different audiences. The same is true for writing. I can't write an academic and a practitioner article in the same day. My brain just sort of get wired in a certain way. So if I'm writing something for Harvard Business Review, that's all I can do that day. I can't write something for Org Science that day. But it's learning how to be multilingual. It's a very valuable skill to have. If you can talk to multiple audiences using the language they understand, you can have tremendous influence.